22 attorneys general around the country joining with public interest groups like the NAACP and the ACLU, and new ones like Democracy Forward are already having success in courtrooms around the country against Donald Trump. Just in the last 10 days of the administration, we have 10 different lawsuits in 6 different states, along with 2 federal judges having blocked 2 of Donald Trump's executive orders, one on birthright citizenship, the other one on federal funding and impoundment of those funds. And I break it all down for you on a new episode of Popok Live, only on the Midas Touch Network and Legal AF. Take a listen. But let's start with birthright citizenship. 22 attorney generals and 2 cities, along with the ACLU and the NAACP and other public interest groups, made 3 separate filings to attack the birthright citizenship memo, in which, and I know that's shorthand, so let me give you a little bit longer version of what I mean by that. 14th Amendment, Section 3 declares if you're born on U.S. soil, you are a U.S. citizen, unless you're subject to the territorial jurisdiction of another nation. That's always been interpreted to mean that you are a child of a foreign diplomat. You know, the ambassador to France is stationed in New York, and as a baby, they're French. They're not U.S. And that's the way that's always been interpreted since an 1898 case of the United States Supreme Court, and the way the 14th Amendment has always been interpreted. Now, I know people are saying, yes, Popok, but the Supreme Court can change the interpretation. I mean, Alina Habba said something like that today, like, well, the law is what the lawyers and the judges say it is, and the Constitution. I get that, Alina. However, when we rely on a 124-year principle coming off the 14th Amendment passed after our Reconstruction period and the Civil War, you know, that's a super precedent that shouldn't be disturbed, especially by executive order. So Donald Trump had his federal government is taking the position that if you show up and you ask for any of the aid that's still available, or any kind of government service or any kind of privilege of the government of being a United States citizen, it's to be denied to a child whose mother is undocumented or here on temporary visa status unless their father's naturalized or an American citizen. That's not how the Constitution works. And you can't change that by executive order. And there's only 2 ways to do it. You get an amendment to the Constitution. Let me get these numbers straight, because I get asked this a lot. So I want to cover it right here. In order to amend the Constitution, there's only 2 ways. There's only one major way to do it without a constitutional convention. 2/3 of the states and 2/3 of the House and the Senate have to approve the amendment to the Constitution. I think everybody can do the math and realize we're not getting 2/3 of anything done in this country, especially in its present state with the present occupant of the White House. So put that aside. That's not happening. And the same thing to call a constitutional convention. And then the resulting, whatever comes out of the Constitutional Convention, still has to be passed 2/3, 2/3, 2/3. Then you have a interpretation of an existing language. It's the other way to sort of change the meaning of things. Now, we did see that with the 14th Amendment and this particular Supreme Court makeup, right? We had the Colorado insurrection interpretation. We know how to read the 14th Amendment, Section 3. And I might have got my numbers confused. Let me start over again. 14th Amendment, Section 1 is birthright citizenship. 14th Amendment, Section 3 is the insurrectionist disqualification provision. In 14.3, we saw the United States Supreme Court tell us that provision doesn't say what our eyes told us it said, and reinterpreted it, right? And interpreted language out of existence about Donald Trump being an insurrectionist and states be able to bar him from the ballot and or from office. Okay. So we know that they're not shy, this Supreme Court and the MAGA right, to touch the 14th Amendment and change it through fits of alchemy to fit their liking. I just don't see them doing it in birthright citizenship. So these 3 cases got filed. One by public interest groups and the attorneys general in Washington and California, in Seattle, Oregon, on purpose, not by accident. Everything I'm telling you now is a tactical strategy or a tactics of the filing on purpose. They filed in Seattle. Seattle's also the place in the first Trump administration where they blocked the Muslim ban. So they knew they had a friend in that courthouse. Maybe not Judge Coffer, but they knew they had a friend there. Okay, so they filed there. 2 other cases get filed by other related groups in New Hampshire and in Massachusetts. What's the common denominator? Moderate to liberal courthouses reporting up to moderate to liberal leaning appellate courts on the way to the Supreme Court. Ninth Circuit on the West Coast, First Circuit on the upper East Coast, New England area, and those would then go to the United States Supreme Court. Now, as of now, some people have asked me in the chat or in the comments, can't Donald Trump and the MAGA file something in the Fifth Circuit and in Texas and get a favorable ruling? But they have to show they've been injured in some way. And the problem is they're not injured by Donald Trump's executive orders. They're benefited. So they don't have the injury that's necessary to bring such a case. So I don't see that happening. It's going to be left to the Democrats and progressives, fair-minded people to bring these kind of lawsuits. And then a fast track over to the United States Supreme Court. We have one ruling in birthright citizenship against Donald Trump and a 14-day, I think there's about 9 days left, a 14-day block. We call it a temporary restraining order on the way to a full hearing on preliminary injunction off of full briefing. The loser of that, and at the rate that case went, it's going to be the Trump administration. When you had Judge Coffer stop the Department of Justice lawyer for Donald Trump in his tracks after about, a good 30 seconds and say, let me just ask you one question. Do you believe the executive order is constitutional? And of course, he's there as the shill and the puppet for Donald Trump. He said, absolutely constitutional, Your Honor. He said, all right, stop. Okay, it's the most blatantly unconstitutional thing I've ever seen in my 40 years in my career as a senior judge. And it went downhill from there for the Trump lawyer. And I've been on other side of that. And I've been on the side where the judge has done things in my favor. And then you just sit down. You're winning. You don't try to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Your best argument is no argument. You sit down. That's what the attorneys general did in the courtroom. And the judge issued the temporary restraining order, subject to 14 days, full briefing, and another ruling on preliminary injunction. And if that goes against Donald Trump, that goes up to the 9th. In the meantime, filings in the other two states, and some people might be asking, if these are nationwide blocks, nationwide injunctions, why do you need to file in multiple courts? Because you don't know what the result's going to be. So it's almost a portfolio method. You file in multiple courts, hoping you'll get at least one in your favor. If you get one in your favor and one against you, at least you have a split decision, and that can get you to the Supreme Court as well. I think, frankly, they're going to get 3-0 in favor of democracy and against this birthright citizenship executive order. I think it's going to go cherry, 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 jackpot. Okay. And then that'll all go up to the United States Supreme Court on an emergency appeal through Supreme Court justices we can trust, like Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sotomayor and Kagan and the rest, and then the full Supreme Court. I think it's going to get to the Supreme Court on birthright citizenship in the next 60 days. And we'll come back and talk about it here on Popok Live. That blueprint got repeated, even involving some of the same groups and the same attorneys general in this new federal freeze funding thing. What's that all about? Okay. A cardinal tenet of the MAGA and of the Project 2025 and of the Heritage Foundation is that the president has unitary powers. All power in the executive branch lies with the president, not with any of his cabinet positions, including the Department of Justice or the FBI. They all report to him, no independence. And that occupant of that has an ability to counterbalance Congress, who is in charge of taxing and spending and funding, by impounding money already allocated by Congress and stopping that money from flowing to the various programs and federal programs. We're talking about a $3 trillion federal set of programs where people rely on this money in order to operate their organizations for healthcare, in medical treatment, in Meals on Wheels, on the performing arts, you name it. These organizations rely on these grants and rely on this funding. This was so bad that the Medicare portal crashed for Donald Trump. You know, that is an abomination for elderly and other people in America that rely on Medicare and Medicaid and the disabled. It literally crashed because people thought he was cutting off in those levels of entitlement, although buried in his executive order, he said, well, I'm not touching those entitlements that go to individuals, only the ones that go to the organizations that help the individuals. Did that make any sense? And then Carolyn Levitt, who I don't know what North Korean catalog they got her out of to be the press secretary. I know she's super young, so I was trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, but she is way over her skis. This looks like propaganda that North Korea and that lady that wears the pink kimono, that she would relish. I mean, just crazy stuff that she's saying out loud. Like, well, the only confusion, knowing that the Medicare and Medicaid portal crashed, she looked the press in the eye and said, the only ones that's confused in this room are the media. I mean, what am I, like fourth grade? Seriously, that's the best you got? As average Americans suffer because Donald Trump wants to reshape the government overnight in his image and the economy and foreign policy all at the same time. I mean, you see how poorly this is going? So the same group, 18 states, filed in Rhode Island at the same time that a large public interest group led by Democracy Forward and I think Nora Meissen filed in the District of Columbia and got a block of this attempt by Donald Trump, illegal attempt in violation of congressional law and the Administrative Procedures Act, to block funding that had already been allocated by Congress. The president can't do that. That's not a check and balance. That's a violation of separation of powers. That's a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act. And they're also arguing a violation of the First Amendment, because money can be speech, and denying these organizations that you don't like, National Public Radio or DEI or, entities, or ones that are in favor of green economy. That's speech that's been tampered with by money being cut off to them by Donald Trump. So an interesting First Amendment argument also coming out of there. Again, multiple double-barreled filings at the same time. DC and Rhode Island. Why? Rhode Island to the First Circuit Court of Appeals, liberal. DC to the DC Court of Appeals, liberal. And you split the load so that if you get a bad decision, it balances out, by having multiple cases being filed and multiple judges looking at these things. And then you lean into the judge that does the best for you. Let's be frank. It's a little bit of forum shopping. It's a lot of bit of forum shopping, I think right now, all the groups that filed simultaneously love Judge Coffer in the Birthright Citizenship case in Seattle. And they'll just sort of lean into him and don't want to muck it up by having another judge. And they're going to slow down the other two cases because they got the ban they wanted with that one filing. And they're all working together. So it's not like, oh, I wanted my case to make it. I wanted my case to be the case. Nobody cares about that. All pro-democracy entities and organizations are sort of working together and rowing together to preserve democracy and to be a firewall. So that's how that works. So I wanted to take the plane up 5,000 feet and have you look down at it with me as a 35-year trial lawyer in federal courts like the one I'm talking about why you do these things, how these groups have joined together. And this is only 8 business days or 8 days into the administration. We are going to see the same group, different configurations, but the same group of attorneys general and public interest groups weekly. The Trump administration is going to be in court weekly, daily, just as we predicted. I mean, I think I did a hot take, right after the election. And I said, here's the good news. Here's the silver lining. There are 18 states that have the blue trifecta, where both chambers of their legislation, the governor, and the attorney general are all blue. That's 18. There's another 4 where the attorney generals are, or they're at least it's mainly in the control of Democrats. And that's that magic 22. You're going to see a lot of Leticia James, the New York Attorney General. She's a living nightmare for Donald Trump. She's the one that got the $458 million civil fraud case off of him. You're going to see her over and over again. And I'll just leave you with this stat on this section. Donald Trump got sued in the first administration over 400 times by the ACLU alone, with an 80% success rate. That's a Hall of Fame number, son, as they say. You can go bat 800, you're doing great. And the attorneys general, the same thing. That was the first go around. Now you can just triple those numbers. It's going to be, if it was 1,000 lawsuits before against Donald Trump's administration, it's going to be 4,000. And I think they're going to stay at the same success rate because Donald Trump has to govern by executive order. So that means he's always coloring outside the lines, and he's always violating and lurching from one constitutional crisis or one separation of power problem or abusive power problem after another. That is a gift to this audience and to our democracy that Donald Trump is trying to operate through executive order, because that is the easiest thing for us to defeat in the courts. So the Supreme Court, even this MAGA right-wing Supreme Court, hates executive orders, really does, and fly specs them to within an inch of their life about whether they comply with an act of Congress or not. And the bigger the item, the bigger the issue, the less likely the Supreme Court is going to find that executive order is valid, because they have their own internal doctrine, the major issues doctrine, which says that if it's so big of an issue, it's something Congress should have done, not you by executive order as the president with a stroke of a pen. Welcome back. That's a new podcast I'm doing. They're up to about 12 episodes now, only on the Midas Touch Network, Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on their YouTube channel, and soon to be on podcast platforms of your choice. Popok Live, I don't pull any punches. I don't take any prisoners. I answer questions from the audience, and I give answers in the way I think you've come to expect. So join me every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the Midas Touch YouTube channel. And while you're here, take a moment and hit the free subscribe button on Legal AF and help us grow this pro-democracy channel. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.